4 minutes ago, behind the heavy mahogany doors of the royal council chamber, the British monarchy emerged permanently transformed. A silent, devastating power shift had just concluded in absolute secrecy. By formal council order, Queen Camilla's senior ceremonial title was stripped away in a single breath, transferred directly and irrevocably to Catherine, Princess of Wales. The announcement was not merely a transition of administrative responsibility, it was a brutal execution of authority that left the room suspended in suffocating quiet. As the final binding words were read aloud by the council secretary, Camilla reached out with trembling, white-knuckled hands to grasp the carved velvet back of a gilded chair. Her breath caught, her balance failed, and before the very eyes of the senior figures who had systematically dismantled the status she spent decades fighting to secure, her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the polished parquet floor. Camilla lay entirely motionless, a fallen figure of ruined ambition, while the secretary's voice continued without a tremor, echoing off the historic tapestry-lined walls. Around the long oak table, senior council members sat in stony silence, the culmination of weeks of concealed venom and subterranean maneuvering. This private council held orders that carried immediate, unappealable force across the entire royal household. By stripping Camilla of her senior ceremonial rank, the council severed her connection to the privileges, precedents, and official duties that defined her standing. In an instant, that immense mantle of power passed to Catherine. Camilla kept her face a mask of bitter composure right until the moment Catherine was officially named. Then, something deep within the queen consort irrevocably shattered. Catherine was not simply inheriting a ceremonial roster. She was taking possession of the exact throne of influence Camilla had spent half a lifetime defending against public fury, private mistrust, and the agonizing fear of perpetual rejection. Sitting frozen in the center of the chamber, King Charles watched the color drain from his wife's face. Yet the monarch remained paralyzed, his lips sealed in agonizing surrender. When the final sentence of the decree struck the room like a heavy hammer, Camilla gripped the chair frame again, whispering in a raspy breath, "This cannot be final." No one answered her. Her legs gave way completely. Charles half rose from his throne, his hands hovering in midair, hopelessly trapped between marital devotion and the terrifying weight of sovereign duty. It was Prince William who acted first, his voice sharp as he summoned medical attendants into the room. As they lifted the unconscious queen consort from the floor, William turned his gaze toward his father, recognizing the hollow defeat etched into the king's weary face. Miles away from the council chamber, Catherine knew nothing of the clandestine vote. She had been intentionally kept in isolation, sheltered from the impending strike so that no whisper could accuse her of orchestrating her rival's execution. Yet this calculated protection meant she was forced to absorb the most explosive news without a moment of preparation. When an official courier delivered the ribbon-bound council letter, Catherine lowered the parchment onto her lap and stared blankly at the decisive paragraph. William stood in the shadows near the window, watching the waves of disbelief ripple across his wife's face. "I never asked to take anything from her," Catherine whispered, her voice trembling with the crushing burden of duty mixed with sudden guilt. William moved closer, reassuring her in hushed tones, fully aware of the tragic irony. His wife was being crowned with supreme trust at the precise instant another woman had been broken by its loss. Beside the main decree lay a thick document, a sealed appendix containing binding terms that dismantled Camilla's remaining network. It drastically restricted her private staff, residential privileges, access to confidential briefings, and ceremonial precedents. Only 3 people had read its contents. As William glanced over the final page, his eyes fixed upon a terrifying detail. The space directly beneath King Charles's signature line remained completely blank. The king had refused to sign. Whether that uninked space signified a desperate act of silent rebellion or total emotional paralysis became the most dangerous, lingering question echoing through the whispered corridors of the palace. To understand how one woman fell while another inherited the kingdom, one must peer through the keyholes of the palace into a bitter war of 2 competing visions. Camilla and Catherine had shared the same balconies and smiled beneath the same crystal chandeliers. But beneath those flawlessly curated facades lay a toxic divide. Camilla had operated as a relentless survivor, clawing her way through decades of public hostility to dominate the crown's inner machinery. Catherine, by contrast, had cultivated public reverence through quiet discipline, patient endurance, and unshakable restraint. The catastrophic collapse in the council chamber was not an isolated tremor, but the culmination of a silent, subterranean war that had metastasized within palace corridors for months. The true point of no return did not begin with a constitutional memorandum or a public scandal. It ignited weeks earlier in a crowded, gold-leaf stateroom beneath heavy crystal chandeliers. During a diplomatic reception, Queen Camilla executed a calculated maneuver. She quietly countermanded a protocol instruction issued in Catherine's name. To casual observers, the moment passed without a ripple. But behind the velvet drapes, the strike was felt instantly. Prince William observed the shift from across the room, his jaw tightening in cold fury. Princess Anne overheard the hushed exchange between staff members, while King Charles watched his wife walk away, ignoring a gentle warning that would later mark the second the hidden power struggle became uncontainable. The rift deepened as King Charles, contending with mounting health struggles, began scaling back his public appearances. This reduction forced the institution to decide who would shoulder the ceremonial weight of sovereign duties. Catherine was designated to assume an expanded public presence, her proximity to the future king making her central to the crown's next era. Yet Camilla maintained ironclad control over central household channels, the covert administrative arteries through which schedules, invitations, briefings, and binding instructions reached palace staff. That administrative chokehold provided Camilla with invisible leverage, allowing her to quietly reshape the internal hierarchy. The simmering hostility finally ruptured during a rehearsal for a state investiture at Windsor Castle. A written directive, personally approved by the king, placed Catherine at the head of the official receiving line. When Camilla examined the printed order, she signaled a senior aide, instructing him to strike the Princess of Wales's name from the apex and place her own above it. William discovered the altered list minutes before the rehearsal began. Tracing the betrayal back to its source, the prince followed the queen consort into a side corridor. Standing in the cold shadow of stone arches, William asked with icy calm why his father's explicit written command had been tampered with. Camilla did not apologize. Instead, she fixed him with an unyielding glare and uttered a phrase that cut like a razor. Catherine needed to learn the difference between popularity and rank. Prince William absorbed the blow in rigid silence, but the words exposed the raw fear underpinning Camilla's aggression. Princess Anne, having overheard enough of the bitter exchange to grasp its implications, sought out the king. According to a classified account drafted following the encounter, the Princess Royal warned her brother that this was no longer a personal disagreement. Camilla had challenged the future structure of the crown itself. To erase an order authorized by the sovereign was to question Charles's authority and sabotage William's inherited legacy. A senior aide subsequently placed 3 earlier administrative directives directly onto the king's desk. Each had left his office containing one instruction, yet reached operational staff carrying another. The pattern was undeniable. Camilla had repeatedly weaponized her control of palace channels to reshape decisions after they were formally approved. Charles summoned her into his private library that evening, desperate to contain the damage before the council took control. There were no photographers or advisors, only Charles, Camilla, William, and Anne, facing one another in tense isolation. The king placed the altered directives on the table like physical evidence of treason, asking if she had deliberately overruled him. Camilla did not deny it. Instead, she turned on William, accusing him of exploiting his father's weakness to build a rival court around Catherine and push the older generation aside. The prince answered that popularity was irrelevant. The true issue was obedience. Charles demanded an apology and insisted Camilla yield control of the household channels. Yielding meant surrendering the power that protected her standing. Camilla adamantly refused, reminding Charles of private promises made long before the crown rested on his head. Princess Anne then revealed she had already requested a formal council review, exposing how staff members feared retaliation if they questioned instructions from Camilla's office. Realizing the net was closing, Camilla pushed her chair back, warning Charles that proceeding would destroy everything he had promised to protect. She walked out and slammed the door, Left in the suffocating quiet, Charles asked his sister and son whether the council truly held authority to strip his wife's title without his willing approval. The answer to the king's agonized question would not come from familial affection, but from the unyielding machinery of constitutional authority. Behind the throne stood an elite network of legal advisors, household authorities, and senior royals tasked with maintaining the continuity of the crown. Their concern was no longer whether Camilla had offended Catherine. Their terrifying focus was whether private influence had begun overriding sovereign commands. When King Charles finally stepped into the council chamber, the recommendation had already been drafted and placed beside an uncapped silver pen. Charles halted at the oak table, scanning the first page in absolute silence. The Royal Council Review had examined ceremonial titles, access rights, and protocol precedents. Its purpose was simple but severe: to determine whether those privileges still protected the crown or had begun irrevocably corrupting it. William and Anne sat opposite the legal advisors, wielding quiet influence. William represented the unbroken future of the monarchy, carrying monumental responsibilities alongside Catherine. The Princess Royal mattered because decades of selfless service made her the institution's moral guardian. Yet neither could strip Queen Camilla's title alone. The final execution required the council's authority and the king's reluctant hand. Reaching the document's conclusion, Charles removed his glasses and looked toward his sister, his voice dropping to a whisper as he admitted that signing the order would feel like publicly declaring his marriage a failure. Princess Anne did not soften the truth. According to the council record, she reminded her brother that protecting his wife from shame could never justify forcing Catherine, frightened staff, or the future crown to accept perpetual sabotage. Her words carried no malice, making them impossible to resist. William then unsealed the confidential appendix. Pages exposed how Camilla's informal channel had deliberately delayed crucial briefings meant for Catherine. The future king laid one specific file before his father, a recorded account showing how a delayed briefing concerning a major ceremony nearly caused Catherine to enter before foreign dignitaries totally unprepared. Her reputation had almost been sacrificed to a trap she never knew existed. Silence descended upon the chamber. Charles understood the crisis had moved far beyond personal rivalry. It was a fundamental threat to whether sovereign commands could still be trusted. Though the council agreed to transfer the title, the king begged for one final night. He sought to give Camilla the chance to surrender the position voluntarily, preserve select privileges, and allow the palace to frame the shift as a graceful transition. Yet when Charles presented the offer in her quarters, Camilla saw no mercy, only defeat. Before dawn, she formally rejected voluntary surrender in writing. Hours later, the council converted its recommendation into a binding order. Charles placed the compulsory statement before her, pleading one last time. Accepting meant preserving public dignity as power drained away. Camilla read every line in cold silence. Accepting required her to confess that the authority she had spent decades assembling no longer existed. Looking at her husband, she asked if he truly expected her to sign away the position he had sworn to defend. Charles offered no defense for the altered orders. He warned her that refusal meant the immediate execution of the appendix, complete loss of staff, offices, and ceremonial standing. When Charles left, Camilla picked up the unsigned statement, tore it in half, and informed her private secretary that yielding would erase her entire life. According to the secretary's account, her voice remained steady even as her hands shook. By morning, staff reporting lines and offices were formally transferred to Catherine's household. Following her physical collapse in the chamber, Camilla requested one final thing: a private meeting with Catherine. For the first time, the two women sat opposite each other without Charles, William, or advisors present. Camilla looked hollowed out by defeat. Catherine appeared deeply shaken. Between them lay the official transfer order. Camilla leaned forward and asked the question haunting her all morning. "Did you know?" Catherine met her gaze directly, answering without hesitation that she had known nothing of the vote and had never requested Camilla's downfall. Camilla lowered her defense, admitting that Catherine's overwhelming public popularity had terrified her, sparking a deep dread of becoming invisible within Charles's reign. That terror had driven her to alter orders and sabotage briefings. Catherine listened, recognizing that ambition had morphed into desperate control. Camilla then slowly pushed the transfer document across the table, issuing a final warning. Never confuse a royal position with personal security. Catherine accepted the document, promising her first public act would not be a victory, but a sober acknowledgement of the human cost behind the crown's survival. By afternoon, the devastating decision had escaped palace walls and seized the attention of the nation. Broadcasters interrupted regular programming across the globe, while crowds gathered outside the gates of Buckingham Palace. Yet the defining image of that historic day was not Camilla's collapse or the council's sealed decree. It was Catherine stepping from her vehicle without a smile, wearing no celebratory jewels, and carrying a handwritten statement. In that restrained, somber moment, the public understood that the monarchy was witnessing a tragic transfer of authority, not a victory parade. The palace released a formal bulletin confirming that Camilla's ceremonial title and household powers had transferred to Catherine with immediate effect. The message was concise and unyielding, omitting all mention of altered directives, delayed briefings, or the climate of fear among palace staff. The country divided instantly. Some commentators hailed the move as necessary constitutional discipline, while others framed it as the ruthless public destruction of the king's wife. The silence surrounding the secret evidence made the outcome even more explosive, as millions witnessed the punishment without understanding the subterranean forces that demanded it. King Charles remained out of public view. He had watched his wife stripped of rank and broken on the council room floor. Now he sat isolated in his private quarters, listening to news anchors dissect his personal failure. According to a recorded account from his private secretary, the monarch ordered the screens switched off, sitting in total darkness as rain beat against the tall glass windows. Catherine waited inside the car as press cameras flashed outside the gates. Turning to William, she affirmed that she would not allow the public to view this moment as a triumph over another woman's humiliation. She had deliberately removed a prominent ceremonial brooch before stepping into the light. She accepted the heavy responsibility, but refused to display triumph. Outside, news vendors held up evening editions declaring across massive headlines that the crown had changed hands, accompanied by a split image: Camilla retreating through a side entrance, and Catherine approaching the main gates. In her handwritten statement, Catherine honored Camilla's decades of public service and pledged stability and restraint. She did not mention victory. When Charles finally entered Camilla's private rooms that evening, the council order was already complete. Her ceremonial seal had been removed, her official folders cleared, and Catherine's name installed in the administrative ledger. Yet the king came not as a ruler delivering judgment, but as a heartbroken husband confronting the ashes of his marriage. Charles sat opposite Camilla, placing his ringed hand on the table, a quiet gesture carrying more weight than any royal decree. He told her he still loved her, but that love could no longer shield actions that had threatened the crown. Camilla offered no further resistance. She admitted that fear had driven her choices, fear of Catherine's immense popularity, fear of William's rising influence, and fear of becoming invisible in the twilight of Charles's reign. Charles listened in solemn silence, but the order remained absolute. Camilla was forced to accept a permanent withdrawal from senior royal duties, losing control of all household channels and stepping back into quiet isolation. Catherine assumed the transferred title, not as a prize, but as a sobering burden. The palace did not celebrate, it simply reordered itself, cold and indifferent to human regret. For in the unyielding history of the British monarchy, individual desires are repeatedly sacrificed to preserve the institution. The crown demands absolute obedience, consuming those who seek to manipulate its authority, while leaving those who inherit it with the heavy, inescapable weight of eternal duty. If you found this deep dive into palace intrigue compelling, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more breaking royal analysis.